And good evening, and welcome to the fall edition of the Rock County Civics Academy. I want to thank folks for joining us tonight. Our topic tonight is one that is something that touches the lives of every person in Wisconsin and those all around us. Wisconsin is a unique state in a whole lot of ways, and one of the ways that municipalities in particular benefit from the uniqueness of Wisconsin is the fact that the issuance and governance of the licensing of the sale of alcohol products is something that, by and large, the state legislature has entrusted to the local municipalities to a great extent. They've become the licensing agents, and they become the entities that determine the broad parameters of rules, regulations, and guidance that's in place to govern how alcohol at licensed establishments is allowed to be dispensed. And that places a great deal of pressure, I believe, on each community's governing board, in as much as if you look across the state of Wisconsin, you'll discover that there's a wide variation of how alcohol laws are in reality actually applied in the individual jurisdictions. So there's some latitude, but yet there's some strong parameters that the state has set that says we have to be within those parameters. Here recently in the city of Janesville, we've had a conversation at the council level about reverting back to policies and practices that were in place before the pandemic as it relates to outdoor dining and the extension of an alcohol license out into the outdoors, and that's brought the issue to the table as one that we want as a community to have a conversation tonight to pursue, and to bring us to a little bit more of a clear position and to the whole status of alcohol licensing. It's my pleasure to welcome into our panel tonight Maureen Busalacchi, who is the project director for the Wisconsin Alcohol Policy Project, which is a part of the Medical College of Wisconsin. Maureen, welcome.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you here. Paul Williams is in a dual role here tonight. Paul is the chairman of the Alcohol License Advisory Committee, which is the committee that advises the City Council on the issuance of alcohol license within the city of Janesville. He also serves as a member of the Janesville City Council. So I welcome you, Paul, tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And my guest to my immediate right is Matt Kealy. And Matt's a familiar face to, I think, a lot of people, in as much as he serves a couple of different roles. He's a past member of the Janesville City Council. He's a current owner-operator of a restaurant in downtown Janesville. And he's also the president of the Business Improvement District that serves downtown Janesville and the environment. So Matt, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's great to have you here. Great to have you here. Let's set the stage a little bit if we could. Pre-pandemic, Janesville was in a routine of licenses were routinely granted, and life was pretty normal. The pandemic threw a wrench into a lot of business plans, and the state legislature took it upon themselves to provide a more liberal approach, I guess is one way to characterize it, of how alcohol can be dispensed within certain parameters in restaurants across the state. And Matt, I want to call on you first because you were in business prior to that change and then in business post that change. Share with us how that worked out for Matt Kealy and the Draft House and for the other restaurants that you represent here within your...
As far as my personal experience or just the policy itself?
Just the policy itself, and then we'll dive into the personal experience.
Gotcha. So the policy itself, is when I decided to start my restaurant, we decided, what our business model was and whatnot. We decided we wanted to serve alcoholic beverages. So that process became for us going to the city clerk, all the applications and stuff like that. Part of the application process was kind of knowing that we were going to have to speak for our business plan. So we turned in our paperwork and we were in by the 15th of the month, so that meant we were on the next month agenda. At that time, we went in front of the, you go in front of the Alcohol License Advisory Committee. They kind of ask you some questions as far as anything from background of the individual, to the floor plan, to where you're going to store your alcohol. You go over those pieces. Once the pieces are kind of given to the alcohol license advisory, the board, or I guess let's say the advisory committee, they will make a motion and a vote to either approve, to make just a positive or a negative recommendation to the council. And at that point, it goes to the council, and if the councils could pass the consent agenda, you can pick up your license the next morning. Some businesses at that point have their patio all set up and ready to go as far as the plan. I think when my time on the council, I learned more places kind of the patio is the secondary piece because you're ready just to start construction. So if you want to go back and apply for a patio piece afterwards, you do the whole process all over again as an kind of extending your premise. So same thing, you put in another application, notice the public, go back in front of the committee again. They consider if you kind of how you've been doing with alcohol, ask the police what their recommendation is. They look at the city staff's recommendation for building to make sure it abides by code, and then same process, positive or negative recommendation goes in front of the council, and then you have the access to do that after that fact.
And because of the pandemic, the change that was significant was you were allowed as a restaurant to expand into the outdoors with, and more importantly, I guess, the carry-out policy changed for restaurants as well, did it not?
Yep, so I think the city allowed you to use kind of what has kind of always been space that maybe could have been green space in front of your restaurant, whether sidewalk, patio, part of your parking lot for outdoor dining. And then the process changed slightly during that because then you applied to the city. There was no application fees, which there normally was. And then I believe, chief building instructor or building inspector.
Official. Building official.
Official, there we go. Would go to the police department, go to the city inspector, and then pass that down to City Hall. So it kind of expedited the process to take some time out for people to kind of get outside when they couldn't go inside.
And that whole change in policy sort of changed the entire environment to a degree, and as much as, frankly, businesses needed to have that additional flexibility in order to make it in a very difficult time, and so that was considered a very positive thing. Here of late, we've had the change where the conversation at the council is to revert back that process of providing those extensions of premises back to the routine that had existed prior to. Maureen, you are representing the Wisconsin Alcohol Policy Council, and they are the observers on a statewide basis that look at how these laws are administered and provides assistance and guidance to local communities on how best to manage their alcohol issues. Your business was a whole lot easier, presumably, before the pandemic. It became a little bit more challenging because of the pandemic. How did your role change in that circumstance?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, Wisconsin has a reputation of excessive alcohol use. In every county, we exceed the national average. So excessive alcohol use is three things. It's binge drinking, which is 4 to 5 drinks in a 2-hour period. And the reason why it's that amount of time is that's when you hit 0.08 and you're legally intoxicated. Heavy drinking, which is 1 to 2 drinks every day. Drinking while pregnant, and underage drinking. So our focus is helping communities figure out how to reduce excessive alcohol use. Because we know that leads to injuries, it contributes to suicides and falls, violence, as well as motor vehicle crashes and other things. So it's both, there's many fatal pieces that happen as well as tragic injuries, especially among our young, our 15 to 39-year-olds suffer a great deal from that. And then there's, of course, long-term impact of excessive alcohol use in terms of cancer rates and heart attacks. So Wisconsin was way above the national average before the pandemic. When the pandemic came, Wisconsinites tended to drink heavier, and we saw a 25% increase in fatalities. So alcohol-related or alcohol-attributed injuries, falls, accidents, disease-related progressions We saw women, even in their late 20s and 30s, needing liver transplants. These things never, didn't used to happen with the frequency. And unfortunately, our numbers have not gone back down as a state. Certain communities have done a little better job of kind of getting their numbers back down, but we're not there yet. But what happened during the pandemic is understandable in terms of businesses, being able to have a marketplace that needed to be in a different situation to reduce the spread of COVID. The challenge is what it did is also opened up access and availability of alcohol. I've lived here most of my life. I don't think we have a lot of problem finding alcohol in our communities. And so it's finding that balance between availability and access to alcohol. And especially with our young people and, people at risk, of excessive alcohol use is the biggest concern.
That creates an environment where the alcohol license advisory committee comes into a role that honestly the state statute doesn't provide a great deal of guidance. The guidance is by and large left to home decisions. As I was reading through the materials getting ready for this conversation, I was kind of surprised because under state statute, each municipality is able to create its own alcohol license review policies. Mm-hmm. And those policies literally have to meet 3 basic criteria. The applicants have to use an application form that's designated by the state, or a local application that requires the same information the state would have. The second requirement, and it's the only requirement in there that's a guideline, is municipalities have to publish the name of the applicant and the location of the proposed establishment in a community newspaper. And the third requirement is the granting of the license requires a vote of the approval of the governing body. Beyond that, the breadth and scope is kind of a local decision. Enter the Alcohol License Advisory Committee that's operating under guidance of ordinances adopted by the city of Janesville and that meager guidance coming from the state of Wisconsin. Your challenge, Paul, is to make sure as an alcohol license advisory board, the applicants are meeting those tests that are required by state statute, those tests required by local ordinance, and that they meet that minimum set of requirements, they fill out an application.
Correct. That's what our committee is charged to do, and that's what the city council is. However, under the ordinance that was passed during the pandemic, that authority was taken away from the Alcohol License Advisory Committee and the city council and given to the chief building official. So neither the advisory committee nor the elected governing body is involved in that process under the ordinance, which, things really changed during the pandemic and things were kind of turned upside down. That ordinance, however, has no sunset clause, and the only way that can end and put the authority back to the Alcohol License Advisory Committee and the City Council is for that to be rescinded and go back to the normal steps. Also under that prior ordinance passed under the pandemic, as it was alluded to by Mr. Kealy, yes, it cut the process down. You probably could do that in a couple of days if you had all your ducks in a row and met with the chief building official. However, the regular process, if you get in by the 15th and we meet on the first Tuesday of the month, and then it goes the next week right to the city council, that's 4 to 5, just maybe 6 weeks of doing that. And if somebody is planning on opening an outdoor patio, I would hope that they were looking at that in either February or March before the summertime, so they could get that approved. However, when we go to the chief building official, I had a hard time finding out who actually had that authority, or who had the extension. There was not a really good list kept of that, plus what regulations were placed on them. There was no public input, there was no public hearings, it was just meeting with one hired city official to get that authority to do the extension of the premises. So that's why I want to go back to the governing body, and as I think you probably have read there, technically the chief building official under the state law is not a governing body, and under state law that authority is given to the governing body. So the opinion that I got from the Department of Revenue agent is not only were those not done according to law, but they should have stopped when it was found out that they weren't done by law.
And thus the kerfuffle that we found ourselves in at that point in time, where the first conversation came to the council and they deferred taking action until after the end of the outdoor dining season. But we're left at that particular point in time where we don't necessarily have a clear-cut policy on how to go forward. It's interesting because it creates an interesting set of potential arguments that can be laid on the table. On the one hand, we're looking at an environment that is going to be conducive to the success of the local businesses and the flexibility that they need to meet their business plan requirements. At the same time, we have a social responsibility, and that social responsibility is to govern the dispensing in such a way that we're not creating a problem in and of itself. And it really boils down to regulation that doesn't stifle business, but is there to provide for the municipality living up to its social and moral responsibilities of enforcing the distributing of alcohol is a substance that is a dangerous substance in the right circumstances. I don't want to confuse it with economic development, but at the same time, there's this part of the argument that goes back to, if business isn't successful, the economic viability of the community is affected, and business wants to be in a position of having the ability to maximize the product that they have and get it out into the marketplace. And the city has a responsibility to manage under the broad purview of what the state has presented. And we're caught in a dilemma, really, where, Maureen, you mentioned that there was a 25% increase in alcohol use during the pandemic. And fatalities. And I don't know if there were certain areas that was more of a problem than others, but on a statewide basis, it was a concern nonetheless. How do you balance all of that is, I guess, the fundamental question I want to get to tonight, and I want to hear the different perspectives of each of you of how we can balance that in a way that is going to work for all concerned and all around. Maureen, you provide a lot of guidance to local entities across the state. In fact, that's the principal role of your organization, is to provide that technical guidance and assistance. What's the message that you're trying to share with municipalities in terms of effectively managing how we deliver on our alcohol policies?
It's a great question. It's sometimes hard dealing on a single issue or a single business problem. What we would like is to cities to take a step back and think about what is the environment that we want for our community. So we've done some studies and we found, like as a grade school kid walking to school, how many alcohol outlets and liquor stores do they pass? Like, is that what the community intended in terms of how they planned where alcohol licenses are? Now, I know we can't put the cat back in the bag, right? But we can be thoughtful as we move forward. And thinking about outdoor areas in particular, while that can be enjoyable for the customer, there's also a message that it sends to the community about alcohol and having our kids always seeing people drinking alcohol. So thinking about how much of that do you want, where do you want it, I think is an important balancing act. And the community also cannot be arbitrary or discriminatory as they make these rules. So there's not an easy answer, but Wisconsin is so far out of the norm. You know, in New Jersey, they have 1 alcohol license per 3,000 people. We average 1 for 354 people. So if you think about that, we have a lot more alcohol everywhere. And so how do we figure out how we balance that and not encourage excessive alcohol use? And I think that's kind of the key. You know, so we help provide technical assistance and with, you know, communities, but I think it's also, we also want communities to take that step back, really think about what is it that you want going forward, and how do you balance those competing demands? Because you've got businesses. We're not here to say, go shut everybody down. That is totally not what we're saying. It's how do we manage this in a way that promotes a healthy community, that continues a healthy workforce, a very productive workforce, because when we look at costs, it's the employers that pay the heaviest price for folks who are binge drinking. You know, because they don't come into work the next day as productive. They call in sick more. You know, there's all those kinds of issues. So it's tough, I have to say, but I appreciate when we can have discussions about it and think about it from the broader, and then be able to narrow down into this particular issue and instance. One of the slippery slopes we find, though, is if you can find a good cause every single license, you might not be doing that right.
Intriguing. I want to bring that down to the local level. We're going to take a real brief break here so that Paul can introduce our sponsors for tonight.
Thank you again for attending tonight's Rock County Civics Academy program. Our ability to provide these presentations is solely dependent upon the financial support we receive from our sponsors and you, our faithful listeners. Our presenting sponsor is Havana Coffee on Milton Avenue. This program would not be possible without the ongoing support of the Italian House and Big Radio, WCLO, WJBL. Supporters include Ragnar Ltd. and Ragnar Software, the John Westfall family, Dan Pushik's Janesville News Report, American Awards and Promotions, and Stockman Property Developments, LLC. If you believe in our mission, we welcome your financial support. Materials explaining our mission and financial support opportunities are available at the registration desk or by visiting our website, commonsenserockcounty.org. We will continue the program, but if you want to continue discussion every Thursday afternoon about 2 o'clock, stop by for a cup of coffee at Havana Coffee on Milton Avenue.
And you'll find us there in the business section of the operation, where we get to the serious, in-depth part of the conversations that we're going to have. We've set this broad table, this buffet of how we can make everything work together in a copacetic fashion. I want to hear, Matt, from you in particular as we start this on the local level. If you had that vision of the ideal system of regulation within the community, how would it look? And how could it be done in a balance between the interests of business and the interest of the community safety, the community health we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, I serve on the ALAC as a city councilor, so I respect the work they do. So I think that's a great advisory committee to provide the city with that recommendation for the license. I don't have any issue with how that process is done. I do think sometimes the application timing and dating is possibly a little more excessive than it should be. You know, if you're not in by the 15th, you wait a whole month and a half before you go in front of the committee. But the agenda's not posted until 5 days before the meeting. So could that be maybe one thing that the city addresses? I think the reality is the tough part of the conversation we're having today is not every operator is the same.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to, you know, be considered to the fact that there are those operators that are non-compliant that suck the resources out of the city from police, time at City Hall for code enforcement. I know they exist, but that's not every operator. So how does the process look? I don't think the application process is a bad process. I think it's a good process. I think you have your public hearing, you notify the neighbors. I do think there should be all that input. I completely agree with all that process. I think the part that we're kind of, to me right now is, the outdoor patio piece is we've already been in front of ALAC. We've already notified the neighbors. At this point, it's kind of a code piece. If I don't have an issue with the police department, I'm running a good business. If I meet the code compliance, do we need to have this long of a process, I guess, is really the piece that I think is the most challenging right now. And I think if there's something the city can do, and if there's something we learned that we didn't have a lot of problem with these applicants that were approved, if there's a way to make this process a little more user-friendly for coming back for a patio outside, I think that's the piece I would like to see improved. Whether it's timing, the process we have, as I understood it, could still be in place as long as it goes to the council for approval. And that's as easy as a consent agenda every other Monday. There still is an opportunity for public hearing prior to the consent agenda, so if a neighbor does have an issue, they could bring it to the council's attention. Council could pull it off the consent agenda. I agree someone should be thinking about a patio early in the season. Completely agree with that. However, the reality is that doesn't always work that way. Sometimes it's something came up, or you realize your patio is not quite large enough, you want to expand your patio, you have an opportunity to do it. How can we address those issues in a timely manner to support our businesses and our community?
You both served on the Alcohol License Advisory Committee, and Paul, you are the current chair of the Alcohol License Advisory Committee, and I've been on the council approval end of those applications, and you see a wide variety of applications coming in, some that are complete and others that you take a lot of guesswork to figure out what's going on. And you've got good operators and you've got bad operators. Within the parameters that you have, Paul, first and foremost, what's the criteria that's used by the Alcohol License Advisory Committee by which you make a decision to approve or not approve a license? And what detail do you need in order to make that work under the current ordinances?
Well, I think the different members have different priorities and different things that they're looking at. We certainly look at the applicant and the agent and everyone, depending on how many people are involved with the process of owning that entity that's coming in, their experience, whether they're just someone who thinks, boy, I can go buy a can of beer at the local liquor store and start a bar and make a whole bunch of money on it and not have to put in a lot of work. We've seen them where they have no business plan, they have no idea, to people that have run a successful business and we know their track record. We look at, we do have a density map that was suggested by Maureen to do for the city, and the city actually got that accomplished. You can go on that map and see where all the Class A and Class B establishments are in the city. That tells you where they're all at, plus you can look at that and see, is this an area where it's going to be a problem? Is there too many in that area? Or is this an area that's going to be like our downtown entertainment district, and that's not a problem, as opposed to whether it's a neighborhood and there's already too many in that neighborhood. So we can use that type of criteria, and of course the background on the people that are applying. The location, not only how many other alcohol establishments are in that area, but are there schools, churches, those kind of things in that area too, in the neighborhood. It's been said, the selling of alcohol in Wisconsin is a privilege. It's not a right, because of the adverse effects it can have from being run incorrectly. So far, it's been a pretty good year. We haven't really had any problems with the local establishments. They've all been, doing what they should be doing. I think, just to make a point, I think it's Wisconsin law that it has to be 15 days coming before the governing body the 15th of the month before the meeting, so it's not a local ordinance. So that's not, I don't think that's one thing that we could change just to speed up the process. It was mentioned that, you know, if you didn't get it in by the 15th, then you have to wait a whole nother month. It's a state law.
And I think the point that is being made without saying it is the fact that the criterion that you as the Alcohol License Advisory Committee apply to each of those applications is either explicitly written into the local ordinance that governs the activity, because the guidance from the state is pretty light. And so it comes down to a question of what's the vision the community really has of how alcohol is dispensed within the confines of the community? What's the image that we want to present? You're put in a difficult spot because you have 7 people on the Alcohol License Advisory Committee that all have a certain degree of subjectivity that goes into their review. And they have a criterion that's established within the ordinance, and they make a recommendation based upon their experience and their professional judgment. It almost begs, on the one hand, the question of should we have more specific criteria established in ordinance in order to maintain the image, or should we continue to have those gray areas that allow each individual business perhaps to function just a little bit differently from the other? Matt, from your perspective, does a one-size-fit-all approach work for this? And you operated a variety of different restaurants in different locations, and by golly, each one of those is a unique entity, and the circumstance, the environment is different, is it not?
No, I don't think you could do a one-size-fits-all. I mean, especially, when you look at not just the hospitality, but any business, just with ever-changing, changing trends. I would love to be the person that's a fly on the wall when the first person proposes the self-serve beer taps here in Janesville. It will come. It's going on all over the country, but you know, the model right now that a bartender doesn't serve the beer, that the person has a tag, they go up to the tap and pour themselves. You know, that's a big thing around the country. If we would have opened 6 months later, I probably would have proposed one. But our business plan was done, the model was there, and it came out right after we announced it. So I don't think a one-size-fits-all works. I do think there's a lot of subjectiveness to the panel, but from what I've seen, for the most part, the panels always worked well together. So I don't know if you establish a level of criteria, if that would be necessarily a benefit for either the city or the operator, because I think it would stifle growth, but I also think it would complicate the process to a point where you're creating a cookie-cutter environment, and probably the easiest way to get approved is a beer and shop bar that has nothing different than anybody else.
It really comes back, does it not, Maureen, to the fact that it's incumbent upon the community to identify and define what it wants to be. In order to have that broad guidance, the council needs to put whatever ordinance in place they want to put in place. And I've seen examples that range from here to here in this state, city to city, municipality to municipality. They're all somewhat different. And it all boils down to, does it not, what do we really want as a community? And when's the ideal time for the community to stand up and say, this is the picture we really want to paint?
Right, and the licensing process does give a lot of latitude for cities to actually create those kind of environments. There's also the option of adding conditions. So if there's a place that is really nestled in a neighborhood, you might put a condition on that you can't put out the trash at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? So you're not bothering neighbors. So there's a number of tools that are available in order to kind of balance and meet those demands, as an example. So there is a piece of legislation right now in front of the legislature, the state legislature, that would basically require that a licensing process be written into ordinance. So that bill is passed the Assembly, it's not moved in the Senate yet at this point. So it may be something that Janesville would want to take a look at in terms of having some of that. But it's always the science, right? These elements, but then kind of the art of, does that fit with the neighborhood? Is it actually impeding another business because it's too close? You know, so there's those balances, looking at the existing businesses and supporting them versus placing many more license holders in the same area. You know, so looking at that density piece. In terms of self-serve, I know that Department of Revenue is going to have an announcement on that in their next newsletter. So on tap by Department of Revenue, we'll find out more about what they think about those self-serves. Because Wisconsin law currently requires face-to-face, you know, transaction.
It gets interesting because one of the tools that's available to the council, to the Alcohol License Advisory Committee, is requiring that public hearing, taking the application back out in front of the public, where ideally neighborhood residents are going to be able to speak to the merits of the proposal. Is there a hesitancy to have that type of scrutiny, and how can you achieve the idea of a transparent introduction of a tavern into a neighborhood if you don't give the neighbors a chance to speak to the issue? Paul, is it?
Well, I mean, that's one of my main reasons for bringing this back and trying to get the process of the outdoor patios back to the ALAC and the City Council, is there was no transparency. You met with the chief building official and gave them your drawing of what you wanted to do, and you got a yes or a no from the chief building official. What I am proposing in the ordinance won't eliminate all outdoor seating, outdoor patio at alcohol establishments. The only thing I want is the process to go back to the ALAC and the City Council, and then with the opinion from the agent from DOR, and then another opinion from an attorney, said that because those were issued by the chief building official and not by the governing body, those would need to be reapplied. So any ones that were issued by the chief building official, they would have to come back to the ALAC and the City Council with their plan. One of the problems that we have, and I don't know if you've noticed this in other cities, not only do the patrons not know where that area that the patio is where you can have the alcohol, but the enforcement, the police department has no idea, because there is no designated marker. It's an invisible area that was granted by the chief building official. You have this much in front of your tavern or your restaurant with alcohol, and you must leave a 5-foot wide walkway. But there's no fence, there's no, even not any painted outline on the street. So the patrons don't know it, and certainly enforcement has no way of knowing it. And I've seen that that's usually done in other cities. That is something that we need to look at. One thing that I have also found from my research, and I'm not proposing this, but I've seen cities are charging for the use of the sidewalk anywhere from $100 to $500 each year for that restaurant or bar to use that public property. And I guess if you look at it and you want to be consistent and fair, when a person is using that sidewalk to run their business, they're not paying any insurance on that sidewalk, they're not paying any rent on that sidewalk, and yet they have an expansion of their business and using property that is owned by the taxpayers, and that's why these cities are doing that, and you have to pay that every year. I think West Dallas, I think was the one that I found with the highest range, which was $500 a year, and it's renewable every year. On a different note, when we get back to the licensing of different establishments, correct me if I'm wrong, Maureen, I think Janesville, are we the only ones still surviving with a separate liquor store from a convenience store, or one of the very few?
I think that still happens in other cities, so
Okay.
there's, but I could not list them off the
Yeah,
top of my head.
but, you know, that's one thing that we require in Janesville is And I'll use Quick Trip as an example. You have the convenience store and the gas station for the Quick Trip, and yet the liquor store is separate. If you go into another Quick Trip in some other areas, the alcohol, everything
It's
is
dispensed
there.
within the
So,
store retailer.
And
so-
the reasoning behind that again is, I can think of a couple good reasons. One is, the exposure to underage and young people going in there and seeing the alcohol, where opposed to being a separate, they can't go into that liquor store without their parent. The other thing, if you talk to, I've talked to a major liquor store owner here, he likes it here. He has another business in another town where the alcohol is available in the store, and he says, any of that alcohol in the store, a lot of it disappears, because at the Janesville store, when it comes time to close, he locks the door and nobody's in there. But at the other store, they put up a little chain, this aisle is closed. Well, anything that goes out there after the store is closed, it's been probably shoplifted. The other thing is, with the separate entrance to a liquor store, the clerk can look and watch the person come in, and they can kind of detect if they're my age, or maybe a young person that might not be 21. But they can see right away, and they don't have to keep an eye on them. Or if they suspect somebody is underage, they're coming into this one small area that they can keep an eye on.
It's really a challenge to find the balance in here. And you raise an interesting point, and that is, I mean, in some communities, I hate to use the example of New Orleans, but New Orleans is one of those communities that, frankly, they have a very liberal application of restrictions on a lot of things, and alcohol happens to be one of them. And there's no real definition of where you can transport your alcohol in an outdoor dining environment. Thank God there's a few restaurants like the Three Sisters that has an indoor courtyard that is but we don't want necessarily as a community, or do we, to have the unrestricted access. Matt, as an operator, you have some legal exposure, do you not? That is exacerbated if you had an unrestricted environment for you dispensing that product, correct?
As far as,
If you want a certain sense of control over where the alcohol you're dispensing is actually consumed.
yes, absolutely, yeah. So as far as yes, we do have liability, obviously, if we overserve someone or someone like that. I mean, there are responsibilities that we have to abide by. But yes, no, we're not asking for a free-for-all here. I mean, that's not, I mean, I don't think there's a bad thing to have regulations and ordinances that are proactive to have a safe and comfortable community. I mean, I think that's perfectly fine.
From a downtown business improvement district perspective, and that's a different hat for you, there's a variety of events that are sponsored downtown to encourage downtown growth and development, and a number of them involve alcohol. This is Wisconsin, and we popularize it. You have the wine event that you go from restaurant to restaurant to restaurant to sample and then move on. They seem to have, as events, worked out, that they've been well managed. There's an opportunity, I suppose, for that to become a problem, but they seem to have been well managed. At the same time, for those establishments downtown that are just doing the routine outdoor dining thing, without the parameters, the limitations, there's some of those vendors, some of those restaurants are in a position where there really is no kind of control over where one goes after one has purchased a product inside the restaurant. Is there a value to trying to create a little bit more specificity from a business perspective, from a downtown business owner's perspective? Are you more comfortable with a little bit more specificity on the geography that you have under your control, your guidance?
So as far as bid, the only position we've taken on anything alcoholic related is that we support a more efficient system for outdoor patios to kind of cut down some barriers.
Okay.
So that's really all BID has taken as far as position. As far as personally, I can see as an operator and as a patron of some of these events in the downtown, we have seen a lot of events that the reality of the beast is the alcohol probably allows the event to continue in the next year. From music to bike races to class reunions, that why it might not be the most glamorous or the desirable way that they make money. If not enough people throw the money in the kitty, these events have found beer sales as a way to kind of make sure the event can kind of continue for the long run. So it's not necessarily required that that individual would do that, but there are things that we see that happens. As far as, some communities, you can walk on the Riverwalk and enjoy a beverage while you do that. There are people that travel those communities and really enjoy that, that they can walk and there's outdoor music and they can grab a beverage and listen to that. I'm not saying advocating for that, but I do think that'd be an interesting conversation to have.
A lot of it goes back again to that premise that the community as a whole has to decide the image that it wants to project. And we're in an interesting time in Janesville, in as much as this issue, in the instant case, it's the question of whether or not the council goes back to a process where ALAC and the public hearing on these licenses actually occurs. But is this a question that could become part of we're in the middle of the master plan discussion for Janesville, trying to determine our image as who Janesville is going to be when we grow up. Is this one of those questions that we seriously ought to be taking to that level and having a broader conversation? Maureen, does that work? You've had a chance to observe policy across the state and across the country. Is that a beginning point?
I think that's a great point. I think it's really helpful for a community to understand what is it that you want to become and how are you going to get there. So then you can look at sort of the mix of businesses that you have in order to determine that. So I think that would be really helpful to make sure that you have an idea about alcohol in the community and how you want to do that. With the issue that keeps coming up in terms of the outdoor patios, we would recommend that you make sure you're compatible with state law. So it's my understanding that there's some concern about that, and I think that needs to be rectified, as soon as possible. That would be our recommendation, that, you follow the state statutes on that.
Well, in particular, the state statute as it relates to who is the ultimate approving body for those
Right.
extensions.
Yes.
Which, again, it goes back to those three basic guidelines, and the third of which is the governing body has to approve the application.
Right. And I would say that watching different communities in terms of how they deal with their alcohol environments, alcohol licensing and regulation is really complex. And so having a body that is familiar with those regulations and really has embedded into what is the vision of the city and where do you want to go with these things would be the best place, I think, to make those recommendations. Of course, the city council can approve or reject those. But I think, it's important because this is not, we're not selling chocolate milk here, right? This is a product that has the ability to harm people, even, people die from excessive alcohol use. So it's really important that we're thinking about it in that way. I would also recommend, in terms of things that, everybody's saying, this has worked out well, this has worked out well. I don't know if your police department is collecting place of last drink. Are you seeing that data, as you're making licensing recommendations? Are you looking at calls of service? Are you asking the health department, in terms of their input in the process? I think, though, making sure that you're looking at all of the data as you make these decisions is also really important, so that you can understand what's going on in the community and then help make sure that if there's things that shouldn't be happening, that they can be pulled back with potentially a license condition or, you know, an ordinance that might need to correct some things.
I want to go two different directions, but I want to take care of one that's come up, and it's a question from our listeners. The city of Janesville recently approved an operating agreement with the Janesville Jets. And one of the provisions within that operating agreement calls for the city of Janesville to hold a liquor license in the operation of the Woodman Center. The question coming from our listener is how does that work? And is there an example of municipalities that are functioning as you function as a restaurant, and do it successfully under state law? Who wants to tackle that particular item?
On advice that I have gotten from an attorney, the city of Janesville cannot be the holder of the liquor license. That would have to go, like our golf courses are licensed, the company that is running our golf courses hold the license, not the city of Janesville. So that is something, I guess, that's being looked at and will be brought forward with possibly at least that part of the agreement being revised and brought back to the council, from what I understand.
Maureen, from your experience on a statewide basis, have you seen other examples of municipalities that are operating as the holder of the liquor license? And does that mean that we should look for the budget process from the council to establish a bartender 1 and a bartender 2 position and a restaurant manager position? How does that work out?
So that's a complicated question, and I don't know the answer for all cities, but what comes to mind is the Milwaukee County Parks system has beer gardens that I believe are under the control of the county board there, and so that would be the one that comes to mind. And there's, you know, I think there's a healthy public debate about some of those in terms of putting alcohol in public places such as a county park. Again, what we look at is what message does that send to our kids in terms of, you know, can you go somewhere without alcohol? You know, can you have a family-friendly event that doesn't include alcohol? Instead of everything, you need to have alcohol at every event.
And the Milwaukee County Park was an exception written into Chapter 125.
Okay.
So it doesn't give every county the ability to, it's just Milwaukee.
Well, I can hear an argument, Matt, from you and others that I would assume in the private sector you really don't want to be competing with government as the purveyor down the street that is competing for the same business you're competing for. Is that a fair observation?
I think it's fair. I think the reality is we can probably do it better than the government, but
I'll agree with you.
but I think right now, and I don't know who holds the current license at the ice arena. Someone who wore the hat that had to figure out a way to balance the budgets. You know, it's the golf course. You know, that was a revenue stream which reduced the operating expense to the taxpayer. I mean, I guess there's, you know, I did struggle and voted against a couple capital things because if they wanted to operate as, you know, a bar, I thought that operated the revenue generator that should cover the cost of it. I didn't think we should borrow money for that, but I don't know where that is. I mean, I think the reality is if we're going to have a conference center that's going to be able to host weddings or conventions, the reality is someone there has to probably hold a license to make that happen. I'm not going to, I think, you know, we can talk about do we like alcohol or not, but I don't think many people are going to buy out a conference center that they can't have a glass of champagne or a beer at a wedding. So we do some, I mean, whether they hold it, I don't know the legalities of that, but I think the reality that the Woodman Center probably has to have somebody as a licensee, an operator, probably makes sense.
And so with that example you gave, often it's a catering company that provides that. It doesn't have to be done, you know, by the city. It can be done by whoever's renting out the property and by the event.
It's one of those that I'm not sure we're going to resolve tonight. quite honestly. We've kind of gone full circle with this, and I want to bring it, I guess, back to the table and bring it all together. The council is going to be challenged coming up here in October, I believe is, they're going to be asked to take a look again at what the requirements are of the state law and change or not change the policies that are in place. If you were to provide council, Matt, to the council, guidance to the council, what would your guidance be as they work through that difficult policy question?
Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if what they're doing is legal or not. If they find that what they're not doing doesn't meet current statute, for someone who already has an alcohol license, I would hope the council can find a middle ground and find something a little more user-friendly maybe to an existing operator.
I would suspect the challenge is, and it's always the challenge, it's finding that middle ground that complements and doesn't stifle. And somewhere in that equation there has to be that middle ground, I would argue. Paul, you're wearing two hats. You're the Alcohol License Advisory Committee, and you take your direction from state statute and you take your direction from city ordinance, which is essentially the same effect as state statute.
Correct.
And then you put your council hat on. How do you balance all of those interests in order to get to what is right?
Well, again, first of all, we have to make sure that what was done or what we're doing is in compliance with state law. Second of all, I really want to make it not a hardship for the business owner. I want to make sure that we have the process so we can do that and still be fair to the business owner, but also fair to the community, and make sure that what we're granting for alcohol is going to not have an adverse effect on the community. And I also feel that it needs to be done in transparency, open government. Meeting with one person at their office at City Hall and getting approved on alcohol, to me, that's not the way to do it. Again, you're not doing chocolate milk here. You're doing alcohol, and if you're going to expand that premises, whether it's onto the sidewalk or doubling the size of your establishment, it still needs to have the look of, to be looked on by the Alcohol License Advisory Committee and the City Council to make sure that that's going to be done correctly.
Maureen, you have a package of recommendations that are available through the Wisconsin Alcohol Policy Project. And it's the SCOTA report, and that offers some really extensive guidance. What, in the last minute or so we've got available, what guidance do you offer Paul and Matt and the community as we go forward and try and resolve this instant case and do it with a long-range view of not stifling, but helping the overall economy of the community and at the same time being socially responsible?
So follow state statute and local ordinance, clearly that needs to happen. And then I think, thinking about this within your master plan and thinking about the impact in the community. So if you look at how many fatalities you're having around alcohol, is it too much? Is that not tolerable in the community? Because we're talking about a particular situation, but we're not talking about overall, what is the burden? How much is your police department paying for all of this? How much is the court system paying? How much are employers losing because people are drinking excessively? So that has to be a factor when we balance all of these other interests.
It's a dilemma that, well, there's no easy solution to it. Maybe from my perspective, it goes back in the big picture, it's time for the community to stand up and let the policymakers know the image that they want their community to maintain, and that's that master plan process that the city's currently in the middle. And now the timing is incredibly appropriate for that message to get back to the council that this is kind of the view of where we want to be as a community down the road. And at the same time, it's finding that balance, and I hope that maybe our conversation tonight has given some insights to the community on just how challenging this question is for the council. And it's given some insights into what's at stake for the private sector, for the business community, as we deal with these difficult questions of what is the right way to approach regulation and to do it in a socially responsible way, an ethically and morally responsible way, and not stifle doing business. It's a tough question. Thank you for your time tonight. I would invite all to join us on Thursdays at Havana Coffee. We always continue the conversation there at 2 o'clock, and you're welcome to be part of the conversation, because hopefully the conversation leads to solutions that address complex problems that we face here in Janesville. Again, thank you for the panel tonight. Appreciate your time with us.
Thank you, Rich.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for this round. Next month, we've got another important program planned. We'll be delving into the world of building regulation, economic development, and a host of related topics as we continue trying to bring clarity to complex public issues on this program, which is a part of the Rock County Civics Academy. Thank you for your time, your attention, and enjoy your evening. Good night.